Good morning. Thank you very much.
I just want to see truly care and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but.
Please do take a seat. Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Good morning, Chair. We'll be hearing from Mr. Julian Williams this
Thank
morning. Mr. Williams, please could you give your full name to the inquiry?
Julian Paul Williams.
Can I just ask you to make sure that I see you're leaning in to the microphone, that's helpful, but if you can keep your voice raised so that everybody can hear you, that would be great. That's why we can't hear, the microphone's not on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Williams, is it correct that you provided two witness statements to this inquiry? The first dated the 7th of March and the second dated the 15th of March.
Correct.
Chair, may these two witness statements be adduced. Their reference numbers are INQ 000166 and INQ 000170.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, I want to first ask you about your background. Is it correct that you, prior to working as a DCO, you were in the RAF for
Yes.
13 and a half years? You were then joined Group 4, which was the predecessor, I assume, to G4S,
Yes.
in September 1993 as a DCO.
Yes.
And then over the next 24 and a half years, you progressed from being a DCO to a supervisor to deputy shift manager to shift manager and then to residential manager.
Yes.
You worked at Campsfield, IRC, then Oakington, and then at Brook House.
Yes.
And you became residential manager at Brook House in 2009, which was 6 months after Brook House had in fact opened.
Yes.
When you were appointed as residential manager, you say in your second witness statement, paragraph 3, no need to refer to it unless you need to, you say that the role was advertised and you were then passed a selection process. Do you remember if that was advertised externally as well as internally?
I don't know.
Just to give more of an overview, you also say in your first witness statement, paragraph 2, that you worked at Brook House until July 2018, when you said it was time to move on.
Yes.
You now work for MITI at in Gatwick as a DCO overseas officer.
That's Mighty, not Mitty.
I'm sorry,
Yes,
MITI.
but that's correct, yes.
And you started that in February 2019.
Yes.
Please could you tell us more about what that role involves?
Basically, it means going to detention centres or IRCs, collecting detainees and putting them on planes to remove them back to their own countries.
So, in terms of the level that is on, that was a DCO level, and prior to that you were at a manager level.
Yeah.
So is that a demotion then? Is that something? Is that further down the tree than the manager, residential manager?
In compared to the IRCs, yes.
I want to ask you now about your role as a residential manager. You say in your witness statement, first witness statement, paragraphs 3 and 4, that it meant looking after the needs and welfare of detainee across 4 wings.
Yeah.
And you say that other areas of responsibility were paid work by detainees, activities, arts and education.
Yes.
And day to day, this would mean attending meetings, holding disciplinaries, investigations, dealing with complaints, walking around the wings and activities corridor, talking to staff and detainees, and inspecting the cleanliness of the wing.
Yes, that's part of it, yes.
Is there any other part of it that I've missed?
No, joining everything up, I think, would be also you'd have duty director as well on once a week.
So you'd hold the role as a duty director, you say once a week?
Yes.
And I assume then there were other duty directors that would hold that position on the other days?
Yes.
And can you remember in 2017 who those other duty directors were?
Michelle Brown, Dan Horton, I think Sarah Edwards. I believe Steve Skip may have picked up a few of the duties.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've said in your witness statement, the first witness statement, paragraph 23, in terms of training for the role, you say, I was given any specific training for this role. I did shadow various managers for a short period of time. Can I just clarify with you, did you mean that you were not given specific training for your role as
No.
residential manager?
No.
You were not?
No. I shadowed the outgoing residential manager for a month.
And would you have found training to be a residential manager useful?
As a residential manager, I don't know what training there was available. As a manager, then there should have been some training available.
Can we assume by the fact that you didn't get any training that there was no training available?
I
Then?
believe so, yes.
That there wasn't any?
There wasn't.
You were in the role of residential manager for 10 years, right up until and the relevant period, rather, was right at the end of that period, so the relevant period being from 2017. What did you consider the challenges to have been for your role during that time?
The needs of the detainee was a lot. Their demands was heavy, and even their attitudes was boisterous at times. So a lot of them didn't want to be there. So it was a case of trying to look after them the best we could, and provide the needs for them the best we could. The role in itself was very challenging. You had staff who was trying to deal with 120 detainees on a wing, going on and off the wing throughout the day. The cleanliness of the centre, detainees to keep their rooms clean and tidy, where some would just graffiti their rooms. And yeah, it's stuff like that, really.
I want to ask you now about the meetings that you were involved in. Firstly, about meetings in general that you attended. You've said in your first witness statement, paragraphs 44 to 49, that you attended essentially four types of meeting. So the first were the morning meetings, which lasted, where the last 24 hours were discussed with senior management, DCMs, the Home Office, facilities, healthcare, catering, and IMB. Secondly, you'd have the monthly security meetings. Thirdly, you'd have the detainee consultative meetings, and fourthly, use of force meetings. Is that right?
Yes.
I want to ask you specifically about a meeting that you were said to have attended in 2016. Michelle Brown, in her witness statement, no need to bring it up on screen, says at paragraph 119, INQ 000164, she says, you were in attendance during a meeting in January 2016 where she raised concerns that G4S would have a similar issue to Medway. And in particular, that there were, because of course at Medway there was abuse that was uncovered by an undercover journalist in a BBC Panorama programme. She says she raised that with Ben Saunders and Steve Skitz, and that you were also present at the meeting, as well as Stacey Dean. Do you recall that meeting?
No. Not the contents of the meeting, no.
So you don't recall Michelle Brown raising the issue of Medway?
No.
I want to ask you about use of force review meetings. You say in your first witness statement at paragraph 46 that use of force was first reviewed by a CNR instructor, and any learning issues were then reported. You said that you don't know how often these meetings took place, but firstly, a CNR instructor would look at the incident, and any learning issues would be reported at these meetings. Senior management would then review these issues within the use of force paperwork, and then issues would be reported back to the CNR instructor to see if refresher training was needed. That use of force instructor, can you remember if during the relevant period that was Steve Webb?
No, it wasn't Steve Webb, no.
Who do you think it was?
I believe John Connolly was one of them,
Yes.
and Dave Killock. But over what period, I'm not sure.
Could Steve Webb have also been doing those reviews? Do you know?
Maybe, yes.
And when you say they were first reviewed by a use and force instructor, do you know if we heard evidence from Steve Webb that those reviews took place just on his own, and he was looking through the footage, and essentially it was a tick box exercise to review that footage and review the paperwork. Are those the meetings you're talking about in terms of the use of force review meetings, or are you talking about an extra layer of accountability above that?
I believe that when the reviews took place, they would sign them off to say that they've done the review, and then any issues or learning issues would then be sent up to a second meeting, which is where it should be attended by management to review these issues and such paperwork, and to see if there's any learning issues there, to make sure, even if it wasn't a learning issue, to make sure everything was done correctly.
And did you attend those meetings?
Yes.
And you said you can't remember how often. Were they ad hoc meetings or were they standing meetings?
I believe they were standing meetings.
And you said you can't remember how often. Was it weekly, monthly, quarterly?
I believe they were monthly.
And can you remember specifically attending any during the relevant period in 2017?
No. Sorry. Do you mean, can I refer to any times I referred, or did I attend?
Did you attend any meetings
If there was
during
meetings,
that relevant period?
if there was meetings, yes, I would have attended.
And you said if there were meetings, could
Yes.
you be sure that there were meetings that were held between April and August 2017?
I can't recall.
I want to ask you another question about use of force. If I could ask Zaina please to pull up a document on screen. It's DL 0000141. That's page 85. This is Nathan Ward's witness statement to the inquiry. Do you remember Nathan Ward?
Yes.
Paragraph 239 in the middle there.
Yeah.
In Tinsley House, I did try and train every DCM in crisis communications and negotiation strategies, and it did have an impact on the number of use of force incidents, which were significantly lower at Brook House than at Brook House. This approach was not embraced, and it led to me being treated as an outsider by those such as Jules Williams and the majority of DCMs, particularly those working at Brook House. I felt as though I was not trusted by the staff or managers in Brook House, who believed I prioritised detainee needs at the expense of staff, and there was a level of tension and conflict with the DCMs about this. It ran counter to the dominant us and them mentality, and I was sidelined as soft and weak. You've commented in your second witness statement that you saw things differently to Nathan Ward. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Can I just...
It's page 4, paragraph 14 of your second witness statement.
Yeah, basically Nathan Ward come from a Young Offenders Institute, so he wanted to make sure that the way we were looking after families and young offenders or children was done correctly, and I think up until then we didn't have the experienced people or qualified people to look after them. So he was making arrangements for these people to go on various courses to gain the qualification needed to look after young children and their families. which is what I meant by I see things differently, because I hadn't come from that background, so I could only go off with what he was telling us.
So from what I understand, Nathan Ward in his statement here is suggesting that every DCM should be trained in crisis communications and negotiations at Brook House as well.
Yes.
What did you think of that?
I didn't have a problem with it because it helped assist with the DCMs learning more, getting more training behind them. He obviously had some previous training from this area and knew the valuable of it. So obviously that's why he wanted to implement it across both sites.
Do you know why he said that he was treated as an outsider by you?
No, I don't understand why he said that. I didn't have a problem with Nathan Ward. We spoke as and when we needed to speak to each other. To the extent I even recall he wanted to move down to Tinsley House to work alongside him, because I think he wanted to use my knowledge to help bring Tinsley forward, because obviously it was the first time he'd been into an IRC, and he wanted to use me as well alongside him. So I don't understand why he said I treated him as an outsider.
Did you think that he prioritised detained persons' needs over staff needs?
Only to the extent of the families, to increase, to make things better, a better environment for the families and children. Outside that, no. And I know that he wanted to bring in a soft touch for the families and the children. He thought that the children looking out of a window seeing barbed wire was not correct. So he wanted to soften the environment for them, to make it easier for them, make more comfortable for them.
What about a Brook House where there wasn't any children?
I don't think he prioritised there over there. I think Nathan felt that he was restricted in what he could do at Brook House, because he was in charge of Tinsley and not Brook House. Apart from training, I can't recall anything else he tried to do at Brook House at the expense of staff.
He says that he was sidelined as soft and weak. Did you see him as soft and weak?
No. A lot of people see Nathan Ward as different because of his personal life. He was looking to join the church and stuff like that. So people seen him different in that respect. But I found him to be a pretty good manager. When he done duty director, he was spot on. I even done a couple of investigations on his behalf for him. So I would never have classed him as soft and weak.
What do you mean by his personal life?
Outside, if I remember rightly, he didn't own a TV or anything like that at home. So his life was different to how most people see it when they've got a TV at home and all that. And like I said, also he was joining the church to become a church member. So yeah, it's different from the environment we was in.
I want to ask you now about your role specifically as a residential regimes manager. You said in your first witness statement, paragraph 5, that you were part of the senior management team from the outset of taking up that position.
Yeah.
And you described Lee Hanford arriving, and when you say Lee Hanford arrived in your witness statement, are you talking about 2016, before the relevant period?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
So he asked for a SMT meeting, and when you asked him if this included you, he asked if you performed the director duty, the daily duty role, and when you replied yes, he said then you were a part of the SMT.
Yes.
Why did you think it was necessary to ask Lee Hanford if you were part of the SMT?
When Lee Hanford come in, I knew that his position from outside of the company was sufficiently higher in what he'd done. He was looking after projects and stuff like that. So when he come in and asked for a meeting as a senior management team, there is two groups of senior management. You've got E1s, which was my grade, And then you had D grades, which was the next level up, which were heads of departments. So that's why I asked him when he asked for a meeting of senior management, did he include me? And he said yes. If I'm a duty director, then as far as he's concerned, yes, I'm part of that team.
So Lee Hanford describes in his second Verita interview that there was a, and I quote, huge missing link, which resulted in you representing Res on the SMT. And he says that you were representing Res since you were the most senior residential manager, but there wasn't in fact a head of Res position in place at the time at Brook House. And you weren't paid, and I quote, anywhere near the grade of head of residence, because you were an E1 grade, as you've just said. DCMs were E2, and there wasn't a D grade manager that was above that. Is that an accurate description?
Yes, I actually took it that the deputy director was the head of residence, because he represented me at various other meetings with the Home Office and IMB and stuff like that.
And just pause there, who was that at the time?
At that particular time, that had been Steve Skit.
And he was your line manager?
Yes, in the relevant period.
Yes. So he was right then, wasn't he, that there was a missing link
Yes.
between you and the duty director?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not duty director.
Sorry, not the duty director, the deputy director rather.
Yes.
Steve Skip. There should have been somebody in between you, the two of you.
Yes.
And was that the case for the whole of the time that you were at Brook House, or just during the relevant period?
Right up until I believe it was January 2018 when Mark Damien was appointed as head of residence.
In your second witness statement, you said that there, as we've just discussed, should have been a manager between you and the deputy director. But you said at the time, I believe it was appropriate for me to be on the SMT. Would you have benefited from the support of having another manager between you and the deputy director?
Yes, I believe so.
How would you have benefited, do you think?
Because I would have someone with more direct contact with. The deputy director was not always available. He obviously had other things he needed to deal with. So whereas I've had an in-between link, then I had someone I could go to more directly and speak with and sort things out, rather than hassling the deputy centre manager all the time.
And you say with issues, are there any particular issues that it would have been helpful to be able to have spoken directly to a manager?
I can't think of any particular issues. I know that coming back down, it would have been sufficient, because information would have come back that way, rather than waiting to see the deputy centre director all the time to find out information. I would have had someone I could have just gone and seen, and vice versa.
Lee Hanford also said in his interview to Verita that you were not competent in a managerial role. This is at VER 000239, page 4, paragraph 19. He also said, we were expecting Julian Williams to punch above his weight in an area, and I don't think he has the confidence to do that, to be perfectly honest. We have the skill set at other grades within the safeguarding to support that area, but the areas that are still failing, particularly October, November, December, and moving into the early part of January, the area that was failing was residents. Your answer to this is in your second witness statement, where you say that there were some areas, such as cleanliness, which are audited by an external auditor. Other than that, are there any other areas in which you consider that he was right, that there were areas in which you were failing?
Apart from cleanliness, I can't think of any. There may have been issues which needed resolving on the wings, like the cleanliness of the wings, the rooms, searching, but I can't think of anything directly.
Ed Marsden, who was questioning Lee Hanford in the Verita interview seemed to suggest that there may have been an issue with lack of regular activities. Do you think there was an issue with lack of regular activities?
That depended on the weather. I think, given the way Brook House was laid out, we made best use of the rooms what was available throughout the centre. We also tried to put activities such as card games and stuff like that on the wings for detainees to have as well. So I think we made best use of what was available. I think the feeling was it could have been more. It could have been more use than what it was. I think when the weather was bad, then the courtyards were closed, so games were not played then. So that had an impact of more detainees walking around the centre with nothing to do.
And were activities something that you were responsible for?
Yes.
Were there any other issues with activities apart from the vagrancies of the weather?
The computer room used to cause problems at times. We had no control over the IT system externally, so that could cause problems at times. So that would go down, and detainees would be unhappy about that. But we used to make arrangements through welfare for them to use the computer if it was an urgent need. So that also could be a problem at times. The cultural kitchen was also an issue at times when we didn't always have the staff to put someone in there to look after it for the detainees to go and cook.
I'll come on to staffings later on in your evidence. I'm also going to now put to you another statement, or rather interview by Verita, and this time this interview was with Ian Castle. Did you know Ian Castle?
Yes.
He said to you, you appeared to, in order to be a good manager, it is handy to have a bit of charisma, a bit of personality. That is not something that he is endowed with at all. I would also expect a manager to be able to communicate with his staff, to communicate with detainees, but I'm pretty certain that he doesn't have the respect of the staff, nor of the majority of the rest of the SMT. And that's at VER 000268, page 7. Did you feel that you were able to communicate with those you managed, the staff?
Yes. Yeah.
And what about detainees?
Yeah, I didn't have a problem communicating with detainees.
Did you feel that those you managed and the rest of the SMT respected you?
I can't answer for how the SMT felt about me. I worked with them, we attended meetings, so I can't answer how they felt about me.
Going to take you now to something Michelle Brown said in relation to Steve Skitt's management of you. If we can please turn to VER 000221, page 117, and it's paragraph 250. So this is a second interview in February 2018 with Michelle Brown by Verita. It's 250. I'll start with the second sentence. If you go through SMT minutes, there's stuff that we talked about, changing and informing the committee about employment of the month. That never happened. Things in meetings just are talked about, if that makes sense. The 28th is a perfect example. We raised it. We raised the month before, and Jules didn't bother coming to the security meeting, and so I complained. When Jules did come to the security meeting, Jules came and fell asleep. It's on there. It is an ongoing action. I don't think Jules likes challenges from females. There was a member of staff before, Stacey Dean, who was security senior manager, and he would just kind of grunt to her. He grunts at me. I don't know what conversation Steve was having with Jules, because Steve says to me, I'm managing him. And I'm thinking, performance managing him or managing him. There is a difference. I genuinely don't know whether we are into that process at all, but I suspect that we are not, and it is just a conversation in the morning to say, you need to look at that. Did you regularly attend security meetings?
Not as regularly as I should have done.
Were you required to go to every security meeting?
I was, however, I was also under the impression that if I couldn't attend, then I could send one of the DCMs from the wings to represent me, which is what I'd done at times.
And when you say under the impression, does that mean were you under the right impression? Was that the right thing to do?
As long as I was, as far as I was concerned, as long as there's a representation from the residential area, that was sufficient.
And was that in fact sufficient?
No, because they wanted me to attend instead.
And once you were told that you should attend the security meetings, did you attend?
Yes.
And did you fall asleep?
I believe on one occasion I dozed. I didn't fall asleep, I dozed for a couple of seconds or something like that. I was not the only one who ever done it, but I never seen anyone else get pulled up for it.
You said you were pulled up for it.
Yes.
Who by?
Steve Skip pulled me up for it.
And was that the only occasion that you fell asleep at a security meeting?
I believe so, yes.
What do you say about the allegation that you don't like being challenged by females?
I didn't have a problem with that. I did not have a problem with that at all.
And what about grunting at Stacey Dean and Michelle Brown? Did you do that?
I don't believe so.
You didn't believe so, or you didn't?
I don't believe I grunted at either of them.
And in terms of performance management, Michelle Brown is suggesting there that Steve ought to have been performance managing you. Were you in fact ever on a performance management programme?
No.
And was it ever discussed with you by Steve Skitt or any other manager?
No.
In your second witness statement, paragraph 13, you describe Steve Skitt as an honest and effective line manager, and that if there was a problem, he would tell you and his expectations of you. Can you remember Steve Skitt raising any particular issues in 2017?
Again, one of them would be cleanliness of the centre. Following a Home Office doing an inspection, or an external auditor coming in doing an inspection, Steve would tell me then. Other things would be to see DCMs on the wing on a more regular basis during meal times. Would pull me up for that if someone wasn't there at meal times. Other areas would be like completing investigations on time.
So those two things that you've mentioned, those three issues, cleanliness, pulling up DCMs, attending meetings.
Not tending meetings, tending the wings.
Tending the wings, I see. So
Yeah.
being present on the wings.
Yes.
And submitting investigations in
Yeah.
time. Were those regular issues that Steve Skitt would talk to you about?
No.
So how often would he raise those types of issues with you?
The cleanliness would be, it could be a positive anyway or a negative from after the Home Office doing their walk-arounds, and that would come from a weekly meeting, or we'll receive an email on a daily basis from the Home Office saying we've been on this wing and this was dirty or that was dirty. So I would also get copies of emails as well. Investigations would be, if I had an investigation, I may not have had an investigation for a couple of months, but timescale might have fallen behind, so they would pull me up for it. GCMs on the wings, again, that wouldn't be all the time. That would be like at meal times if someone wasn't there. So again, he would only pull me up if he was aware of the situation.
You've mentioned cleanliness quite a few times.
Yeah.
Was that a particular issue at Brook House?
Yes.
In a particular wing or a particular place? Or?
One of the main areas where we used to get pulled up a lot was the showers. And as I used to try to explain to management, I wouldn't scrub one of those showers for £1 an hour. So it's difficult to get detainees to scrub body fat off the back of a shower for £1 an hour. And so we quite often get pulled up for it. The other areas would be, the floor would be dirty, which needed polishing or cleaning, or bins needed emptying and stuff like that, or graffiti on the walls.
Where detainees didn't clean, such as in the showers, wasn't there a cleaning contract for paid staff to come and clean it?
For Aramark, no. There's been, from what I can gather over the years, there's been a bit of to and fro of who was actually responsible for doing it. Certainly in the early years, I used to work alongside with Aramark, and they used to clean the showers, give them a scrub down once a month. But then it came about that they were not responsible for it, and so it then fell down to me and get paid workers to get to do it.
I want to now take you to Michelle Brown's witness statement, INQ 00164, please, Zainab. It's page 3. And it's paragraph 4. It's just over the page, please, page 3. This is Michelle Brown's witness statement speaking about you. I'll summarise it here. Essentially, she says that she experienced some frustrations working with you. She said that you lacked coaching skills and the desire to develop yourself or others around you. There was a perception that there was a lack of faith in your ability to complete and deliver to the required standard, that you did not have the skill set to deal with computer work, and high-level stakeholder engagement was needed. Do you agree that you lacked coaching skills and a desire to develop others around you?
I don't know what she means by coaching skills or desire to develop. In the early days, I had attended various courses. Certainly before I joined Brook House, I attended various courses to learn. Once I become a senior manager, I didn't find many courses available which to assist me to go forward. So the desire to develop myself, I believe that may be referring to the Corndale course which we were put on, which I was struggling with. As to others around me, on their EDRs, I used to give targets. I used to ask them to go and look at various courses which they like to do, so in order to help them develop.
You've mentioned Corndale. That was something that was brought in by Lee Hanford after the relevant period, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you say that you struggled with Corndale.
Yes.
Corndale. That was a kind of training scheme, wasn't it?
It's
For managers?
a level 5 management training scheme.
And why did you say you struggled at it? In what way?
Finding the time to do it. I didn't struggle with actually doing it, but it was finding the time to do it. And Lee Hanford's answer to was that I should do it at home if I couldn't find the time at work to do it.
We'll come on to training for DCMs as well in a moment, and some of the problems there. I just want to ask you a few more questions about what Michelle Brown has said. How were your computer skills?
I could use a computer. I could carry out investigations, use investigation skills. My wording may have been a bit bad. I was tested for dyslexia, and so my wording or the way I sentenced stuff together might have been a bit bad. And I did have a computer program to put on my computer to help me with that area and that line to increase it. But basic computer skills, yes, I could write reports up, I could use it, I could.
Do you accept any of the criticisms that she makes there?
No, I don't accept any of that. The only thing I would say was delivering or completing investigation of grievances on time. I did struggle at that with times, complete the investigations on time, and would have to ask for extensions.
And why would you have to ask for extensions?
Some of it could be that staff weren't available at the time, so I had to wait for them to come back on shift. Other times could be that I had heavy work going on at the same time, or the duty director, so there could be times that the investigations wasn't completed on time, and I'd be chased up for it.
I want to now ask you about your visibility on wings and also cliques. You've said in your first witness statement that you used to get around the wings on a regular basis, as paragraph 23. And in general, I did not see any issues with staff attitudes towards detainees, including during the relevant period. Mr. Williams, we've heard evidence that compared to Steve Skitt and Michelle Brown, you were much more present on the wings. So DCO Ed Fiddy said that. Did you watch Panorama?
Yes.
Did you watch it live or did you watch it afterwards?
I watched it live.
And were you surprised at what you saw or not?
I was disgusted with what I saw, and surprised, because I didn't think that was going on. But I was actually disgusted with what I saw.
Is it right, as Ed Fiddy said, that you were around the wings a lot?
Yes.
We've heard evidence from numerous detention centre officers during this inquiry, including Steve Webb, who called D728 a fucking twat, threatened to punch the cunt in E-Wing. Mr. Fiddy in himself called a detainee an absolute pufter, and so on. There's a lot of swearing and verbal abuse of detainees that was seen on Panorama, and we've heard during this inquiry. If you were on the wings a lot, how did you not hear this kind of verbal abuse that took place?
When I was on the wing, staff would be aware of it, so they know that if they were behaving that way towards the detainee, I would pull that member of staff up straight away. I'd take them to the office, call them up to my office. But staff, once a senior manager walks on the wing, then staff behave normal.
And you said that you would call them up into the office. How often did that happen?
Not very often. Some of the times I'd come down to a wing and a member of staff would be having an argument with a detainee, and so I'd wait for that to finish, and then I'd speak to that member of staff privately or call them up to the office and ask them what all that was about, and I'd go and see the detainee, see if there was an issue.
And when you say an argument, what do you mean? What kind of thing were the detainee and a DCO arguing about?
It could be anything from the detainee demanding to see the Home Office, want to know why he hasn't gone home, why he hasn't been released. It could be a number of reasons. And
did you ever hear a DCO use bad language towards a detainee?
No, not in my presence, not while I was on the wings.
And how often did you have to speak to a DCO for having an argument with a detainee?
I wouldn't say it was that often. Maybe once a month I'd pull someone up just because they're having an argument with a detainee and voices were raised.
And was this during the relevant period as well in 2017?
Yeah.
You said in your witness statement, your first witness statement, paragraph 7, that the culture at Brook House had improved from when you first started in 2009. In what way had it improved?
The staff become more experienced. When I first started there in September 2009, staff were very inexperienced. They'd never worked in a detention centre before, so they were learning their way as they was going along. And so detainees become more settled down in the centre. A lot of detainees come from prisons and areas like that when Brook House first opened up. So they knew the staff were inexperienced, so they took advantage of it. And after after the years passed on, the staff become more experienced, more settled down. Detainees become more settled down, so the place become a better running place, environment.
What did you mean by culture? What culture had there been at the beginning when you came in 2009 compared to the end?
There was, when I first started there was a very hatred, dislike for Home Office.
Caused that from who?
The detainees. And so that caused a lot of problems which the staff had to deal with because they were the front line between them and the Home Office. So the staff had to deal with that, and a lot of issues raised from detainees in that respect because they wanted to speak to them, wanted to see them all the time. Like, so there was issues there. The actual running of the place, once the detainees had been in there for a little while, they seemed to have settled down in the environment. They found friends of different nationalities, friends from outside. So in that respect, the culture changed and settled more.
But the same detainees weren't there from 2009 until
No.
2018, were they?
No.
So why would detainees' attitudes towards the Home Office have changed in that period?
I think that was because the Home Office had moved forward in regards to feeding back information to detainees. One of the areas in particular I can think of was that, I can't remember when it came out, but they would give detainees 24 hours notice of their pending removal. This allowed detainees to arrange visits, to arrange onward transport when they got home, to make phone calls. And so they were happy about this because prior to then, they weren't getting notification of removals.
What about staff culture? You've spoken about the way detainees felt about the Home Office. What about staff culture? Had that changed during your time at Brook House?
Yes, because staff started understanding that their role in what they were doing and how to look after detainees and the detainee needs.
So,
During that relevant period, the staff culture or the morale went downhill big style because a lot of staff were disgusted with what they saw on the Panorama programme and then had to deal with the aftermath of it with detainees.
so the culture that we saw in Panorama of staff, that was better than what you saw in 2009? The way that staff we saw in were acting towards detainees?
No, that was just pure disgust in the way they were behaving. That's not what I saw back in the early days.
You said in your first witness statement, paragraph 36, that I would like to think that I had an open door approach with staff. I'd often walk around the wings speaking to detainees and staff. We heard from Callum Tully in his live evidence this. He said, the most egregious act of cruelty and mistreatment of a detainee that I can remember was performed by 2 DCMs. So I think when you're a DCO, if you have people above you that are treating people so abhorrently, then you're not going to have any confidence in raising complaints. The SMT were barely visible. Members of the SMT, like Jules Williams, were close to abusive members of staff, like Graham Pennell. So people like myself had no confidence that going to the SMT would be anything other than fruitless. And whose word was it going to be? The word of a DCO against the word of a DCM? Much of the abuse would happen inside cells in which there was no cameras. So how you would substantiate any of your complaints would be very difficult unless you had other officers who would cooperate with you. But my experience was most staff were too scared to raise concerns. That's INQ 000106, page 29. Do you have any comment to make in relation to that?
I know staff didn't trust some of the DCMs. They didn't trust them because, exactly like you said, they wouldn't take any further action on anything.
Was there any particular DCMs you're thinking of?
No, I can't think of any particular ones at this time. But I know their staff didn't trust them at times.
Which staff didn't trust who?
There various staff on the wings They believed that with some of the DCMs there was no point talking to them because nothing would get done, or they wouldn't act upon it, or they wasn't visible on the wings to deal with issues.
Are you thinking of anyone in particular?
No, I'm just summarising how staff felt at times.
And what about you? He's not just saying that DCMs can't be trusted. He's saying that you'd have no confidence with members of the SMT would take anything forward.
If it was brought to me, I would have dealt with it. As simple as that.
Were you close to abusive members of staff like Graham Pennell?
I knew Graham Pennell, yes. I did socialise out externally with Graham Pennell.
We'll come now to Nathan's evidence in relation to socialising and the existence of a clique. If we can please turn to DL 000141, page 59 to 60. It's paragraph 166. This is Nathan Ward's first witness statement to the inquiry. It's paragraph 166. Just go over the page, please. I'm afraid that doesn't seem to be the right paragraph. I'll read it out if that's all right. While I was at Gatwick IRCs, I had a particular issue with residential manager Jules Williams, who was in charge of all the residential staff and therefore responsible for setting the tone and attitude of staff and detainee relationships. Jules didn't embody the values of respect and dignity. He would simply get the job done and was dedicated to making things happen, regardless of the human cost. Thank you. 168. Why do you think that Nathan Ward would think that about you?
I don't know. It's correct that I was dedicated to making things happen and get the jobs done. I wouldn't have said that I regardless of human cost. There's no way. I don't know why he would have said that. And I did respect the detainees. I used to show them a lot of respect and dignity, so I don't know why Nathan Ward would say these things. I have no idea.
And then I'll continue. I think it's over the page. He was surrounded by a number of staff which I felt he was inappropriately close, such as Graham Pennell, Alan James, Anthony Morgan, David Aldis, Joe Marshall, Luke Hutchinson, Nathan Ring, Simon Brobin and Stephen Marner. This group were protected and favoured by Jules Williams, and this dynamic is representative of the hierarchies that operated in Brook House amongst the staff, which fostered a sense of collusion and impunity. If you were in Jules Williams' inner circle, you knew that you would be protected. Were you friends with the people mentioned there?
Can you just go back?
Just scroll back a page, sorry,
just,
thank you.
Yeah.
The bottom of the page. 168.
Thank you.
Graham Pennell, Alan James, Anthony Morgan, Dave Eldis, Joe Marshall, and so on.
I disagree with that.
Just firstly, the question that I asked was, were you friends with those people that are listed there?
Majority of them, yes, not all of them.
And he describes them as your inner circle. Were you close friends with those people?
With some of them, yes.
Did you socialise with them outside of work?
With some of them, yes.
Do you know what he means by you would be protected if you were part of this inner circle?
No, I don't, because there's names on there whereas I had done investigations and sick reports, and some of them I had issued disciplinaries to, so I wouldn't have protected them.
Who are those people?
Joe Marshall would have been one, Graham Pennell's never one, Simon Brobin.
What about Nathan Ring?
I didn't have much to do with Nathan Ring. I had very little. I went out a few times with Nathan Ring in my period of time there, but I wasn't that close with him.
Take that down, thank you. Mr. Ed Fiddy, DCO Ed Fiddy, also gave evidence to this inquiry, and in his witness statement, no need to bring it up, INQ 000163, page 39 to 40, he says that he was bullied and treated unfairly by you, that you undermined him in front of staff, and he gave an example of where he had unlocked a door wrongly and you had showed him up in front of other staff. And he described you as a powerful figure, and that you would say to him, "Man up." He'd spoken to HR about it, and he said it was borderline bullying. Did you bully Ed Fiddy?
No.
Do you remember the incident that he's talking about pulling him up in front of staff, about unlocking a door incorrectly?
No.
Did HR speak to you about the fact that Mr. Fiddy had complained about you bullying him?
No. I know during one annual report where they had their ADR appraisal, Ed Fiddy was not happy about the comments I put on it, and we spoke about it, and if I'm right in saying I readjusted the comments, which he was then happy about, but that's as far as...
And what were the comments?
I can't remember now. I think it had something to do with his work, but I can't remember what they actually were. It was a few years. I think it was about 6-7 years ago, so I can't remember.
You said that you agreed to change what you'd said in this review, is that right?
Yes.
Can you remember at all what it was that you changed it to? The issue?
I think I changed the wording. I didn't actually change what it was I had said in regards to the importance of it. I just worded it differently.
Did you ever say to him, "Man up"?
I can't recall.
Have you ever said to any other DCO or DCM, for that matter, "Man up"?
As far as I know.
Is that
Not,
no?
not as far as I know.
I assume you would know because you were the person
Yes.
saying it.
Yes.
So did you say those words?
I
"Man
can't recall ever saying it.
up"? Did you hear others say "man up"?
I have heard it once or twice, yes.
And who have you heard it said to and from? By, rather.
I can't honestly recall who said it or who said it to whom.
Was it a DCM saying it to a DCO? Is that more likely than a DCO to a DCO?
It could be both DCM to DCO or DCO to DCO.
What about a DCO or DCM to a detainee?
No, I've never heard that said to a detainee.
We've heard from several witnesses that that phrase "man up" was used regularly around the centre. Did you see evidence of this as a macho culture?
If I've heard of it, then I would have dealt with it because it's not appropriate. So, in the ever after, whether I've seen it as a culture, it's not for me to say. It's not because I haven't actually heard it myself. So,
Do you think there was a macho culture at Brook House?
I believe there were some people who thought they were above what they were doing. Having watched that Panorama programme, yes.
What about in your day-to-day, forget Panorama for a moment, but from what you saw, being on the wings for 9 years, did you see evidence of a macho culture?
No, not directly, no.
So you're just saying that you saw evidence of that in the Panorama programme, but not in reality. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying? Sorry, rather in your experience.
Yeah, in my experience, no.
If we can go to what Ben Saunders has said about you, it's KEN 000001, page 31. That's paragraph 166. Right at the top of the page, bullet point at the top. Jules Williams, as residential manager at Brook House, he had quite a large area of responsibility, managing all issues of a residential nature. There are some things he did well. He could also become quite defensive and abrupt, and there's a tendency for him to be more critical than giving praise. Do you agree with that statement?
I could, yes, become defensive and abrupt, especially in meetings, because I believed in defending staff on the wings at meetings. So I always want to have my say and put my point across. So I could become defensive and abrupt. That's being critical. Yes, I'd pull staff up. I would quite often pull staff up. Rather than giving them praise, yes. If some staff are doing something wrong, I'd pull them up.
And if you were overly defensive, isn't that a problem when learning lessons?
I wasn't overly defensive. I'd be defensive if someone was putting them down. So I would be defensive in supporting them.
And if you were overly critical, would that also deter people from bringing forward genuine concerns?
I believe I'd be critical in the way they're doing their job at that particular time if they've done something wrong. So I'd be critical in that. So it wouldn't be a case of not being able to bring their concerns to me. It'd be a case that if they were doing something wrong at that particular time, like not checking ID cards on doors, I'd pull them up for it. I'd ask them why they didn't do it. So that's how I meant that by being critical. There has been times I've given praise as well. I can say I have given praise. Not often, but I have done it.
And did those that you were managing bring forward concerns to you?
If they had issues on the wings, they would speak to me, yes.
What kind of issues?
It could be anything from the detainee complaining on the wing, wanting information, refusing to leave the wing, got on the wrong wing and won't get off again. It could be anything from a day-to-day running over the centre.
I want to ask you about your management now of DCMs. You can take that down, thank you. In their interviews with Verita, both Ryan Harkness and Stuart Povey-Meyer comment on the difficulty completing DCM training. And we referred earlier to your difficulties in completing the Corndell training. Harkness, in his Verita interview, I won't bring up for reasons of time, VER 00238, page 5, stated that he never had any training as a DCM, and that you were responsible for his training as his line manager. He said that he couldn't do this training because he couldn't find time during the day to do the micro study. Povey-Meyer stated in his Verita interview, VER 000280, page 9, that it was not easy to get the training due to poor staffing levels and turnover. We also heard from other DCMs who gave live evidence to the inquiry, for example, Luke Brewer and Stephen Webb, that they received no training to become a DCM. Is there supposed to be some training
Yes.
when somebody is promoted to a DCM?
Yes.
And what should that consist of?
It should be consist of attending various courses or training sessions with different departments around the centre to learn how things are done, like HR for sickness and grievances and dealing with grievances, with the complaints department so they knew how to fill out a complaint or a grievance. security, so they knew what they were doing in that area. So yes, and I also believe that there was a book developed by another manager to give them that training, so they could then follow a certain path of knowing what they had to learn in order to become a DCM.
So a type of booklet
Yes.
which set out what they needed to be trained
Yeah.
in, or rather the training itself. And were you aware that there were difficulties of DCMs completing this training?
Yes.
When asked whether Ryan Harkis had ever had an opportunity to discuss with you the difficulties about training, he said in his Verita interview, VR 000238, page 5, Jules is a difficult person to get your point across with. He is not very understanding. What do you make to that?
I believe Ryan Harkis is referring to the Corndale training, because along with myself, a lot of us was actually struggling to complete it.
But he says when he tried to raise this with you, he said Jules is a difficult person to get your point across with. He's not very understanding. What do you say to that?
I believe because I understood where he was coming from, so there's no offer of help I could give him because I was in the same situation.
And what action did you take, if any, about this fact?
At the time, none, I don't think.
And why not?
Because as I said, I was in the same situation, struggling to complete the training myself.
Why didn't you raise the fact that you were struggling to complete this training with someone more senior to
I
you?
had.
For example, Steve Skitz.
I had.
And what was his response?
Their response was that they were going to offer me support, or I could go and see 2 particular managers who would help me with complete the training. The problem was it wasn't actually doing the job, it was finding the time, so I never went to them to speak to them.
So did you in fact finish the Corndale
No.
apprenticeship
No.
programme? Ryan Harkness also says in the same interview, page 6, that he did not have an objective setting session with you as his line manager, and he never had targets, objectives, nothing, never had an EDR. Firstly, what's an EDR?
This is the annual appraisal system.
And is it correct that he never had an EDR with you?
He would have had at least one with me.
So you've said in your second witness statement that you would have had one yearly. He says he would have expected one a week after he went live as a DCO in April of that year. Would you have normally had an EDR when somebody first becomes a DCO?
No.
And in terms of EDRs, did you do them regularly with the DCMs that you'd line managed?
They were annually, and also we used to do a 6-monthly review just to see where they were with any training courses they'd asked to attend or objectives, to see where they were with it and to see whether we needed to review those particular objectives or training courses.
I want to bring on to, that was what Ryan Harkness has said about your management of him. I want to turn now to what Ramon Geraldo Albalez has said. Michelle Brown, her witness statement, I won't bring it up, but it's INQ 00164, page 3, paragraph 4, says that DCM Geraldo was frustrated with you, upset by lack of support he received and how he was spoken to at times. And looking at his Verita interview, he also says that. It's VR 000215, page 7. He says that he moved to Tinsley House because he couldn't work with you. Do you know why DCM Geraldo said this?
I don't, because as far as I was aware, Steve Skip moved him to Tinsley House. He didn't move himself.
I want to ask you now about staffing levels. We've touched on that in relation to training. If we can bring up, please, on screen SJS 000462, page 4. This is a residential update that you gave to the SMT meeting on the 23rd of August 2016. It should be the top of the page there, under the heading BH Residential JW. says updated on staffing issues due to covering other areas. What did you mean by staffing issues?
One of the main issues was staffing on the wings. It was one area which was always being ripped apart, and also activities. So if staffing it was short on their wings, then staff would be pulled away from activities or visits to cover wing staff.
And how regularly did that happen?
Weekends was a main area. Again, this was due to sickness as well, and also whatever was happening within the centre at times. Certainly, if we would have escorts on, then staff would be taken from the wings to cover this. If we had constant supervision on, staff would be taken away from wings, from visits, from activities to cover constant supervisions. So, but on weekends, the staffing level was slightly lower, and so it had more of an impact on the weekend.
And what effect did the lack of staff and activities have on detained persons?
It meant that some of the areas couldn't be opened, simple as that. And we sort of like aimed to make sure the main areas, which was like the gym, the courtyard, and the library and the computer room, were always open for them.
You've raised that in that meeting, the SMT meeting in August 2016. What, if anything, was done about it?
It would go back to detail. Detail would be asked to look at it, why there was an issue, what happened, was it a staffing issue, has staff phoned in sick, and so detail would be asked to look into it and to find out the reasons why there was a shortage of staff for that particular weekend or that period.
And did you get feedback after that?
If I went and asked for it, yes. Otherwise, I left it to senior management, because these meetings would be brought up, and so I left it at that for them to look into.
Was this a regular issue?
If I remember right, because you had 2 shift patterns, so one shift would always be pretty hefty, would be pretty good with staff. The other one would be slightly reduced, and that would be because of sickness and suspensions and stuff like that. And so whenever that weekend come up for that shift pattern, then there's always going to be an issue until staff returned back to work.
How often did that shift pattern come around?
It would come around, because they'd do a 4 on 4 off shift pattern, so
almost every other week?
Yeah, every other weekend.
And so that issue happened every other weekend?
For a while, yes, until staff returned, yeah.
And was that during the relevant period as well in 2017, can you remember?
I'm not sure.
Can we please turn to the next document and bring it up? It's VER 000260. This is on pages 13 to 14, please. This is a Verity interview with Stuart Davis, an ACO, and it's lines 228 to 232. So Miss Lampard asks, when was that? Was that for the period we're talking about? That would be 2016, 2017. When did you off the wing? January 2017, so yes, it's more like 2016. That's when I was at breaking point. For instance, there was one day when it was myself and Louis Jacks on Delta and 2 officers on Charlie wing. DCM Dix came into Delta wing and said, one of you needs to go to the courtyard. I said, that's not going to happen. He said, why? I said, there are only 2 of us on a wing and the contract minimum is 2 at a time. That was the requirement at the time. I'm not sure it's changed, so no, I'm not going to do it. Louis is not going to do it. We've been on Delta Wing for a few years now, we're established. DCO Dick said that's fine and walked off. Was that something that you were aware of, that there sometimes would be only 2 people on a wing?
Yes.
And was that enough in your view?
No.
And why not?
The daily runners of a wing for 12 hours can be very demanding on members of staff. You've got one on the door, opening and closing the door all day long, and you've got the other one walking around the wing doing responsibilities of the wings and all the rest of it. At the same time, they're trying to man their office to help with detainees, inquiries and all the rest of it. So 3 was what they needed on a wing to run a wing successfully without any issues.
So he goes on to say at paragraph 232, in the middle of the paragraph, it doesn't add up. You're breaking the contract by that. It's incidents like this, like that we felt necessary to call a whistleblower because we had reported this to managers, we had reported this to Jules, we reported this to Beck, and it kept going on. Do you recall Stuart Davies contacting you about this particular issue?
He may have done, I don't recall it, but he may well have reported it to me.
And if he did report it to you, do you remember raising this
I would
with
have.
senior management apart from the time that we've seen in August 2016?
If he reported this to me, I would have then contacted the DCM to find out what's going on, why ain't there staff there, and got them to deal with it.
He says it kept going on. That suggests that the problem with staffing persisted. Would you agree that it persisted from 2016 to 2017?
Yes, because he may well have started out with 3 officers that day on that wing, but then if they had an external escort, then the staff had to be taken from somewhere, which would then leave them to 2 officers on a wing. So it was an ongoing thing.
I want to take you now to minutes of an SMT meeting on the 9th of February 2017. That's at CJS 000555, page 1. And it's item 3, so just scroll down please. Matters arising. BS, that's Ben Saunders, updated about staff engagement and staff retention, needs to organise focus groups and ways to support staff. And then later, starting with Vision, just at the bottom there. Vision, BS, Ben Saunders asked for feedback on the new poster. DH, that's Dan Horton, said that a great place to work might not resonate with staff. And MB, Michelle Brown, it was not a vision, not where we are at the moment. Do you agree that it wasn't a great place to work?
I agree it is not a great place to work in the length of hours staff done. It was totally unfair for asking them to work 12 hours. Could be very draining on them. So I agree with that. I also agree in respect that there may have well been staff shortages at times, which also then put a lot more pressure on staff, which made their job a lot harder. So yes, I would agree with that in that respect.
You said in your witness statement that it might not resonate staff because of the long hours, which you just mentioned, and because staff believed they were not listened to. Who were they not listened to by?
They believed by senior management.
And you were part of the senior management team, weren't you?
Yeah.
So do you include yourself in that?
Yes.
Why did you not listen to staff?
I would have listened to staff what I needed to deal with. What these stuff I believe are talking about is the hours and the shift patterns and stuff like that, and the sickness is what I believe they're talking about.
Why did you not listen to them in that respect about the long hours and so on?
Because there's nothing I could do about it. All I could do was pass it up to Ben Saunders, Steve Skitt, for them to look at. I couldn't do nothing about it.
And did you feel they did something about it?
I think something did change. I can't remember when. I know they done vast recruiting drives to increase the staffing levels to make it easier for the staff on the wings.
And was this after Panorama? So in end of 2017, beginning of 2018.
I can't remember whether it's after or before, but I know that they've done some significant recruitment drives to get staff in.
I'm going to ask you about the additional extra beds. Do you
Yep.
remember in
Yep.
early 2017 there were 60 additional beds that were introduced over 3 wings? You've said in your witness statement, paragraph 9, that there was no increase in staff.
Yeah.
Steve Skitt, in his witness statement, won't bring it up, SER 00455, page 29, says the opposite to you at paragraph 84. He says extra staffing and some scope for greater activity was built into the contract for these beds. Was that your impression?
I believe at the time, although Steve Skitt said the extra staff, I believe the extra staff is actually just replacing staff that had already left.
So there wasn't net extra staff?
I don't believe there was net extra staff, no. I believe they're just replacing staff who had already left.
We heard from Lee Hanford yesterday that was not enough activities for a number of people that were detained before the 60 beds were introduced, never mind once they were. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. The activities were, like I said earlier, was minimum. We made best use of what was available, rooms and all the rest of it. We did try to do a little bit more for them, but whether that was because of the extra 60 beds, I'm not sure. Like a cinema room and stuff like that. But I don't think that was actually because of the extra beds. I think that's just something we was trying to do anyway.
And did the having 60 extra detained persons, did that have an effect on any other aspects of the regime?
It worked out that there would be only 20 on a wing across the 3 wings, so it didn't really have that much of an impact on the wings itself or the activities other than what was already there.
I want to ask you now about ACDT
Yep.
and mental health of detainees. You say in your first witness statement, paragraph 10, some detainees did slip through the net because they did not show outward signs of issues or did not speak out about their issues to officers or healthcare staff, or there was language barrier problems. What did you see as outward signs of issues or mental health?
Sorry, can you say where is that?
It's your first witness statement.
Yeah.
It's page 3, paragraph 10.
Right, that's not in there.
I think it's actually the beginning of, at the top of page 4, I think, of your first
Right,
witness
okay.
statement. Yeah, if you just turn over
Yeah,
the page,
sorry.
it's just, yeah.
Apologies, thank you, Derek. It's right at the bottom of that paragraph, page 4. Can you see C? We worked alongside in-house nursing staff. Can you see that paragraph?
Is that on my first statement you said?
That's your first statement, page 4. It should be under and after the first tab. So can you see that at the top that's ABC and then ABC? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right, yes, I'm with you now, sorry.
It's okay. The last sentence of that paragraph says some detainees did slip through the net because they did not show outward signs of issues or did not speak out about their issues to officers or healthcare staff or language barrier problems.
Yeah.
My question was, what are outward signs of mental health issues?
Basically, detainees, we used to do a monthly review with detainees on the wings to make sure they was okay and all the rest of it.
So a monthly review.
A monthly review with detainees on the wings.
Do you mean all detainees or do you mean just detainees under
All
ACDT?
detainees on the wings should have had a monthly review on them. And so these questions would be asked how they were then, how they felt. They'd have the same questions when they first arrived in the centre, whether they had any mental health issues or tendencies of suicidal. They'd be asked a few days later, again the same question to making sure that they didn't have any, they didn't show anything or tell us anything. So We've done everything we could to pick up whether they had any suicidal thoughts or tendency thoughts in that respect.
You've said outward. You said
Yeah, I
Some
mean,
slip through the
like
net.
demonstrating self-harm is what I mean, outward signs, or coming to us saying, I've got mental health problems, I'm hearing stuff in my head, I need to speak to someone.
And did you know what to look out for, apart from somebody saying, I'm going to self-harm, or in fact self-harming?
Yes, there was other signs, which would detainees being withdrawn by staying in their room, not coming out of their room would also be a sign. Being a bit of a loner when they was out and about, so would also be something we would pick up on. So there's other outward signs as well we would pick up on someone who perhaps was struggling.
Did you have any training on how to look out for the outward signs of mental health?
I did attend a one-day training course with healthcare regarding mental health issues.
And when was that? Was that at the beginning of your time at Brook House,
No,
or-
that was years later. But I did attend a training course, yes.
And it was just one day?
I believe so, yes.
Was that the only mental health training you had in the whole of those 9 years?
Yes, I believe so. And I think that's because we were pushing it for some kind of training, because it was a case of have to train so we could deal with people with these issues rather than not deal with them, and also recognise signs and stuff like that.
Did you feel confident that you could recognise the signs of somebody who was struggling from mental health?
Only through experience, not through training, only through experience that I was able to pick stuff up.
Would you have benefited from more mental health training?
Yes.
And you said that you only got that one-day mental training having badgered, presumably, senior management
Yeah,
for it.
well, we kept asking for it. At one stage, I did arrange for a small group of people to attend a course at college, but that fell through, and so then we reverted back to our own healthcare for training. And I think the senior management then arranged it properly through healthcare.
And that was the one day you're talking about?
Yes.
You said that there were language barrier problems. Are you suggesting that detained persons who did not speak English had less protection, had less help from healthcare?
No, because they would use the language line the same as we would. So it was there available for them, or big word, available for them to use the same as what we had.
So why did you say that some detainees slipped through the net, in part due to language barrier problems?
Yeah. Basically, because they couldn't speak English, so they couldn't get it across at the end of the day. I suppose that's all I'm referring to there.
So do you think that the big word, was it the company that was used for interpreting?
Yes.
Do you think that wasn't effective?
It was effective when they were used. I found them effective many times when I used them.
So why did you say that some detainees slipped through the nets?
Because of the outward not actually recognising signs. Or,
And was that due to lack of training of officers, do you think?
Yeah, perhaps.
I want to ask you about food refusal. Is it correct that the policy requires someone to be identified as refusing food if they miss 2 meals from the servery? Is that right?
To be honest, I can't remember. It's because the policy's changed so many times over what's reported, what's not reported to the Home Office, and what's raised as an ACDT, not an ACDT. Someone who hasn't eaten is classed as someone not eating, not necessarily food refusal, but purely not eating for that day.
But there would be a food for refusal log, wouldn't there, that
Yes.
you were required to fill out?
Yes.
You said in your witness statement, paragraph 91, the first one, that food and fluid refusal policy was not followed if, for example, a detained person was buying food from the shop.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
even though that is not in fact the correct policy, is it? It was about taking meals from the servery.
Yeah.
Was that ignorance of the policy widespread, do you think?
I think all the wings had viewed it the same, that if a detainee's not eaten, but was seen taking food or buying food from the shop because they could actually generate a hot meal for themselves, then yes, it was the same across all the wings.
You said in your Verita interview, page 23, no need to go to it now, that an ACDT was rarely opened for fluid or food refusal. Is that right?
Yeah, in the early days it used to be raised, it used to be opened, but then, like I said, policies changed, and so it didn't need to be opened straight away.
Chair, I have probably around 15 minutes left. I don't know whether you'd like to have a break now for 15 minutes or continue. Until in your hands.
I think we will continue for 15 minutes if that is okay.
Thank
You very much.
I want to ask you now about drugs, Mr. Williams. If I can take you to the document CJS 000530, and it's page 3. These are minutes of an SMT meeting on the 28th of April 2016. Just go to the top. It should read, and I'll read it now. That's right, the second line. Intel to do searching at Brook House, but not being closed off. Not enough staff to do full searches. Discussions about where the resources come from to do full searches and who are doing them. You were present at this meeting. Were extra resources provided for this to do full searches?
I don't think extra resources were provided. What we had to do was change the way or the timing of searches, so we had additional staff from around the centre to carry out these searches.
So additional staff were provided to carry
I
out
believe
these
so, yeah. We
searches?
would take staff and visits maybe to help with the searching, or depending on the time we could get the office closed and the staff on the wing would then go off and do a certain amount of searches.
So were you confident that searches were properly taking place
I
following
believe,
this meeting?
I believe at times they did struggle, but again, what came out of meetings was that they need to be done. We have to make the effort to get them done, and so we have to do what needs to be done to get them completed.
Take that down, thank you. Nathan Ward makes the following allegations in his witness statement. I won't bring it up, but he says, when 2 members of staff were suspended pending police investigation regarding drugs, it was extremely hard to contact one of them. However, Jules Williams, who had brought one of them into the company, was always able to make contact with him. Poor culture amongst Brook House residential staff, and it is as though some are protected by Jules Williams, and this goes unchallenged. Were you aware of staff bringing drugs into the centre?
Right, first of all, I never brought anyone into the company. I never have in 24 years, so I don't know where Nathan Ward has got that information from. I wasn't aware of staff bringing drugs into the centre until they were suspended. And as to contacting them, that if I was appointed by HR to be their contact manager, then I would do what it takes to contact them by the phone and leave messages for them.
Was it true that you were always able to make contact with staff?
No.
Pending police investigations?
No.
Even when it was difficult to contact them otherwise?
Well, there's 2 things. One, there's no reason, if I was the contact manager, there'd been no reason for anyone else trying to contact them, because any information would have gone through me other than via letter. And secondly, I didn't contact them straight away. I would have to leave messages. Sometimes it'd be 2-3 weeks before they come back to me.
Jerry Petherwick says in his interview, CJS 0073667, page 3, no need to go to it now, but he says, my take on him, that's you, is that he is clumsy, no sophistication, but Lee Hanford, interim director at Gatwick currently, believes Jules would not tolerate such behaviour. You said in your witness statement that what you believed, this is in your second witness statement, paragraph 34, you say that Lee Hanford saw you as straight down the middle person, and if you knew anyone was taking or bringing in drugs, I would support it. Were there times when
Report it.
Report it, sorry. That was my mistake. My mistake, report it. Were there times when you demonstrated this, that you had to report anyone bringing in drugs?
I never actually come across anyone bringing in drugs, so I was never put in that position throughout my time there. It's as simple as that. I know it was always security-led, and security dealt with it. If there was any involvement in myself, then that would come through by security. But otherwise, it was a security-led intelligence, and they would deal with it, and I wouldn't even know it was happening until these members of staff were suspended.
I'll bring us on now to disciplinary and grievances. You said in your first witness statement, paragraph 55, that your role generally was to carry out investigations and then that were given to you by heads of departments such as security, HR, heads of residence and so on. And that included viewing CCTV, reading reports, interviewing staff and so on. In terms of disciplinary and grievances concerning you, there was one disciplinary matter which you were involved in, and that was a formal investigation in which Sarah Newland appeared to have conducted the investigation. We know this from notes of Jerry Petherwick's visit to Gatwick in October 2014. I won't bring them up, but they're at VER 000103, page 2. Can you explain what this investigation was into and what the outcome was, please?
Yeah, basically one weekend I was in the office with other members of staff, and I was mucking about with a banana. One of the members of staff was a lesbian in that, and for some strange reason, a couple of days later, it was suggested that I had been homophobic towards this member of staff. I was spoken to by Michelle Brown, who I apologised to and apologised to the two members of staff. A few days later, an investigation was opened up on me, as Sarah Newland conducted it. I was found not guilty of the allegations, but my behaviour was not befitting of a senior manager, and so I was issued with a first and final written warning.
So do you accept that your behaviour was not befitting of a manager? Yeah. Turning briefly to a grievance meeting which took place on the 4th of January 2017, which included bullying by Luke Instone Brewer and Babs Fagbo. We have a document, I won't bring up, CJS 0073633, page 4, where it was said that Jules is known to be friendly with other DCMs and officers, and staff are concerned about raising issues. This was in relation to Luke Instone Brewer and Babs Fagbo bullying, and in relation to Stacey Dean. Were you friends with Luke and Babs?
Yes.
You said in your second witness statement that you don't think the nature of those relationships and other members of staff had an impact on the willingness to speak up and raise issues. But do you know any other reason why Stacey Dean would say this?
I believe it's because of my relationship with some members of staff. Yes, I got on with Babs to do in work, but externally I've been out socialising with Luke, so I believe that's because of my relationship with some of the staff externally.
And did you let those relationships that you had with staff externally affect any of your decision making within the
No.
centre? I want to ask you finally about your departure from Brook House. You've said in your witness statement, in your second witness statement, that you were struggling with the documentation side of things, and that you were constantly chasing DCMs for paperwork and had to fill them out. Michelle Brown says in her witness statement that in August 2017 there was a conversation about you struggling in the role and that you were potentially going to be demoted. The suggestion is that nothing happened due to the Panorama broadcast. In your witness statement, what paperwork are you referring to that you had problems with?
I'm referring to carrying out investigations and grievances because they were all time bound. I'm also referring to the Corndell management programme because I believe that had a great impact as well because I was seen as not participating in it correctly or help or trying to complete it at any stage. And I was spoken to by management, senior management, on a couple of times as to why I wasn't completing it on time.
And you've already given your explanation as to why you didn't complete it on time. You said due to understaffing. But what about the investigations?
Again, investigations and grievances, it could be delayed because of the staff not being in the centre, off sickness. I'd have to wait for them to come back on shift patterns. And sometimes I'd have 5 or 6 staff come back. They could be on holiday, so I'd have to wait. And so sometimes investigations and grievances got delayed that way.
Those are just the usual types of issues, but
Yes.
was there anything above and beyond that stopped you from conducting the investigations in time?
No.
Did you struggle with any other aspects of your job?
Not as far as I know.
Michelle Brown talks there about the possibility of being demoted. Did you know that at the time?
No.
Were you spoken to about any problems apart from what you've just referred to, the investigation disciplinaries and...
I was spoken to about the
conduct?
cleanliness, about the centre. That was one of my areas. Because obviously the Home Office, like I said previously, the Home Office would do their walk around and pick up areas in the centre. So I've been spoken to about that.
Were any actions taken to support or assist you?
No, I was just given this information and then got on with it.
You said in your second statement, paragraph 11, that eventually there was put in place a new head of residence.
Yeah.
So you had a direct line. So that missing link that Lee Hanford had been speaking about was then filled in.
Yes.
So does that mean that the head of residence then was your direct manager?
Yes.
And who was that?
Mark Damien.
And when did that take place?
I believe that was January 2018.
Finally, I won't bring it up, but Lee Hanford has said this in CGS 0074048, page 8, paragraph 28. It said, during my second period, which was just after the relevant period, he came into post in September 2017. It became apparent that due to increasing demands on service delivery, Jules was struggling. Managers who were reporting to him reinforced this opinion. Areas of service delivery were failing and causing frustrations amongst staff and detainees. Jules was not embracing the investment that G4S had made towards his development, despite further support being offered, and he left the company in July 2018. Was further support offered?
No.
Why did you leave Brook House?
I was actually made redundant. Lee Hanford, obviously spoken to his seniors, and it was decided for me that I was no longer required, as I was not committed, and so I was made redundant.
Was it true? Did you feel it was true that you were not committed?
I didn't think it was true at all.
Thank you, Mr Williams. I don't have any more questions. Chair, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions for you, Mr Williams. Thank you very much for coming
you.
this morning. I know it's not an easy experience, but I'm grateful that you've come and given evidence to the
Thank you.
inquiry today. Ms Townsend, shall we take 20 minutes, slightly longer? We're having a change of witness, aren't we? So
Yes, thank you. So 12:05.
thank you very much. Thank you. very much. Ms Moore, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. We have the evidence now of Mr Horton.
Thank you.
Okay, if you repeat after me. I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please take a
Thank
seat,
you.
Mr Horton. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr Horton. Could you confirm for us your full name?
Yeah, my name's Daniel James Horton.
You have there a white folder of documents, which I may refer you to, or I might show them on the screen. And at tab 1 is your witness statement, which you made to the inquiry and you signed on the 2nd of March 2022. That statement will be adduced in full, and the reference for that is SER 000453. And what that means, Mr Horton, is we won't go over everything in your witness statement today. We already have that as your evidence and the chair can consider all of it. We're going to focus on some of the key issues.
Okay.
So as to your background, you joined Brook House in January 2009,
Yes.
and that was a DCO role. And that was to be trained for when Brook House started accepting detainees in March 2009.
Yeah.
So you've been there since the start.
Since the start of Brook, yeah.
And you were promoted to team leader, which is later known as DCM,
Yes.
in September or October 2009. And you say in your statement that you ended up working many of the DCM roles in Brook House.
Correct.
February 2016, you were seconded to an operations manager role. And is that an E1 role?
That's an E1 role, yes.
And we've heard that E1 is sort of in between DCM and senior management.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
And then you secured a permanent E1 role in July 2016, and this was support services.
Yes, so the role was changed to support services, but yeah.
I hope we can have on screen CJS 0072810. And you've already commented on this in your witness statement. So if we go to page 2, this is a organogram or a chart
Yep.
of G4S as it was during the relevant period. You're there on the left-hand side as Head of Support Services. You say actually that's not the correct title.
It was just known as Support Services Manager.
Fine.
Head of normally denoted that you were part of the SMT, a D grade, they refer to them as.
I see, and you were, as you said, in E1.
Yeah.
And underneath that is the list of responsibilities, so contracts, auditing, complaints, training, health and safety. You say C&R, in fact, wasn't part of your role.
No, it wasn't part of my role.
Whose did that fall under?
During the relevant period, I can't quite remember. I think it sat within security at the time, and
Yeah.
it sort of remained there.
But the rest is correct.
Stores was sort of co-managed between Jules Williams, who was just on, took
Yes.
most of the share of stores, and I had an oversight for some of the ACO areas, but that moved into sort of operations as well.
And so what did the role of a support services manager, in brief, kind of mean for you day to day? Were you doing lots of different tasks within these? Did you have an oversight?
Yeah, so it's having oversight of those different sort of satellite functions. So it was, I had audits and compliance as a team, complaints, training, health and safety, central detail was also part of my remit. Even though it's sort of sitting under Michelle Brown there, that was sitting in support services. So a number of small teams with a few people in those. So it was touching base with lots of those people.
And you've told us that during the relevant period, while you were in this E1 role, part of that included acting from time to time as duty director.
Yeah, so we'd have a roster for duty director, generally once a week, and then one every 7 or 8 weekends, we would pick up duty director.
And how did that role differ from your normal day-to-day role as support services manager?
So the duty director role was about oversight of the centre. So we had operational sort of running responsibility to run the centre day to day. So we would look after sort of staffing issues, any incidents, attend certain reviews and certain meetings. So it was, you sort of stepped away from your day job to a degree.
Yep.
To focus on doing duty director.
I see. You're the senior person on the ground.
Senior person on site, yeah.
And your current role at Brook House, where you still work, I understand?
Yeah, so my current role is the Assistant Director of Safeguarding at Gatwick.
So for all of the Gatwick
For
sites?
Brook House and
both of
Tinsley
the
House,
Gatwick sites. We heard yesterday from, you can take that down now, I want to ask about your audits role. So we heard yesterday from Mr Castle and Mr Gasson some detail about contractual monitoring. And you discuss your role in this at page 22 of your statement, so paragraphs 87 to 89. And I want to ask first about the monthly reports. So we heard a little yesterday, and I'll try not to go over too much of the same ground again, about Schedule G of the contract. And
Yes.
in essence, and do correct me if I'm wrong, Schedule G is a list of performance measures, points attached to them. And when the measure isn't met, so when there's a failure to meet that measure, this should be reported to the Home Office. And unless there's an accepted mitigation, a reason why that wasn't met, it results in a financial penalty.
Yeah, that's correct.
Can we look at an example from June 2017? You have it at tab 3, but I'll ask for it to be shown on the screen. It's CJS 004586. So this is a monthly report, obviously from the relevant period, June 17, as we see. And if we just quickly go to page 16 of that, we'll see there it's signed by you,
Yep.
and it's dated 7th of July 2017, and we see below a list of who it's circulated to. So centre manager, deputy centre manager, various Home Office parties, head of care and regimes, etc. So what's your role in preparing these reports? Obviously you sign it off, but what role do you take in preparing them?
So the compliance function that I oversaw, I think the reason why I completed this report was probably because the manager in that area was off that month. Normally, though,
Is that Barry Timms?
yeah, normally Barry at the time, or Vicky, or one of the other guys who was in post would have completed them. So generally, the role of that function would be to compile all the management data from across the contract. So all the other functions would feed in to us their relevant data, and we would compile it and put it into this report. And this report was generated as a result of the meetings, the weekly meetings we had with the Home Office, where they would accept or refuse mitigation for the issues we raised, and that was what we reported on this.
I see. So your role is more to collate all the information and put it in one place rather than to create that data?
Yeah,
Is that
so
right?
all the functional heads would have
Yeah.
completed their end of month reporting, and they would have sent it all into my function.
Thank you. Can we go to page 1 then of this report? So we have, just to give an example of some of the things that are reported, the available detainee places, the total number per the contract, and the total number in fact, and any penalties which attach. At 2, there's the failure to provide available services. Penalties can attach to that. At page 3, there is a list of untoward events, and that's not a general term, that's as defined in the contract. And I won't go on to these, but at pages sort of 13, we see the total points incurred for the month. We see penalty points based on available DCO hours. So
Yes.
that's 14. So total points there. Page 14, penalty points which are based on the available number of DCO hours. And we heard yesterday if that fell below, we could have a penalty applied. And
Yeah.
at 15, there are some statistics as to the number of people who are on Rule 40, Rule 42, the number of use of force events, etc. So some of these pieces of data are matters of counting. So, for example, the number of rooms available, the number of DCO hours provided, they're just things that you can tot up and count,
Yes.
aren't they? And then if we go back to page 3, please. Some of them required an element of judgment. So we were speaking yesterday about the self-harm resulting in injury
Yeah.
data. You mentioned that the data is provided by functional heads. Do you know who the head providing this element of data, the self-harm resulting in injury data, would have been?
So it would have been who was looking after the Safe Community team at the time. I can't quite recall who it was. It was Michelle Brown, or it might have been, I can't quite recall exactly who it was. It sort of changed. It was quite fluid at that time with a senior management role, so it did move around a bit. But the functional head for that would report him.
And that's somebody at SMT level?
The D grade would present that to us.
I see. And obviously, not all incidents of self-harm resulting in injury need to be recorded here, and that's clear from if you look at the wording in Schedule G, isn't it? Because it's only those where there's a failure to follow processes. So, for example, and I won't ask you to look at it now on the screen, but the same month, June 2017, there's a combined report, which is a report that's provided to the IMB, which records that there were 9 acts of self-harm that month,
Yeah.
3 of which required treatment on site, so at least 3 resulting in injury. Do you know how the person who inputs the data here knows that the 9 events of self-harm don't need to be reported?
I think, I'm not entirely sure of the wording for that, so that part of C is quite cut down. I think
That's right.
I think it mentions around resulting in injury that requires hospital treatment
I think it's just healthcare treatment.
and is a direct result of a failure of procedure. Or
That's
something.
not quite right. It's where it involves a failure to follow
Yeah.
procedures set out in Schedule D.
So I know that at the time the Safer Community team would have done self-harm investigations.
Right.
So following an incident of self-harm, they would have done an investigation into that and would have looked to try and identify whether there was a failure under that. Every act of self-harm that occurred at Brook House was reported via an incident report, and that was shared with the Home Office. It had to be with them within 24 hours, so that would have detailed the officer's version or account of events that had taken place. And also there's a monthly Safer Community meeting
Yeah.
where, again, acts of self-harm are discussed and the results of investigations are discussed. So had those investigations decided that that was relevant, it would have been reported as that to the Home Office.
Sure. And you say that there's self-harm investigations after acts of self-harm. Is that after every act of self-harm?
I think that was the intention. I can't tell you, it wasn't my function, I can't tell you whether it did happen 100% of the time. But they were supposed to happen.
And would they have been done by the Safer Community team?
Yes.
So you rely on the information that's given to you by the Safer Community team
Yeah.
in order to complete this part. You or whoever completed
Yeah, that
Mr.
specific
Tim's.
part, it would be from Safer Community, other parts would come from different functions, yeah.
And when reports weren't completed by you but by Mr. Timms, for example, did you have an oversight of the data in there?
Yeah.
Did you check it?
Yeah, so Barry or whoever was completing it would send it to me first for me to check before it was then submitted.
And just using this as one example, the self-harm resulting in injury, the data that you're provided, do you do any check on the adequacy or accuracy of that data?
There would be some level of checks. I can't recall what checks we did. Generally, we would accept what we were being given by the functions and report back on what, because they were the subject matter experts, so we'd report back on what they reported to us.
And that would be for self-harm, as you said, the Safer Community manager.
Yeah, much like for, for security information reports and stats on other bits and pieces that we'd get.
Mm-hmm. And we've heard, and we discussed yesterday with 2 of the witnesses, that during the relevant period, there were never any reports that found their way into these documents of self-harm resulting in injury that fulfilled the contractual requirements of Schedule G. Was that something you were aware of at the time?
I think from recollection, it was very, very rare that anything did result in that.
Yeah.
And still, outside of the relevant period, it was very rare for a self-harm relating an injury to be a consequence of a failure of procedure.
And did you know that there was, in fact, a level of self-harm, for example, 60 events during the relevant period? Did you know that there was self-harm despite that it isn't recorded?
Yeah, that would have been reported on a different end-of-month report.
Yes. We see it, for example, in the combined reports that go to the IMB.
Yeah, so it was all reported that in different reports.
Did you ever question the fact that, despite the fact that there was such, there was a level of self-harm, there was none fulfilling the untoward event requirement?
I never questioned it, no.
Looking back, do you think it's something that could have been looked into in more detail to ensure
I think there's a
accurate?
number of things. Sorry, I spoke over you.
sorry.
I think there's a number of things in that report that were never constituted a failure. So, did I look at self-harm differently to any of the other failures in there that didn't have one? No. Obviously, that's not to say it's not, more serious than some of the other things, but No, I didn't actively go out and think this is strange that it hasn't been reported.
Do you know if anyone did?
I'm not aware of if anyone did or not. But like I said, you know, the Safer Community team would have been completing the reports. Knowing the people that, you know, especially the DCMs that were involved in some of that stuff, they were very thorough. Should any of concerns been raised by them about self-harm resulting in a failure, that would have been raised and it would have been investigated and potentially resulted in disciplinary procedures. So that would have generated that failure. But in an absence of that, then no. But I do, you know, I recall at the time the team were very thorough.
It requires, though, doesn't it, a level of self-reporting, even though you say, for example, should concerns have been raised by DCMs, that could have resulted in a penalty. But that requires that a DCM says, I made a mistake, potentially, or one of my team made a mistake. So we've seen, for example, the evidence of Mr. Chris Donnelly. I don't know if you watched his evidence on the 23rd of February. But
I didn't know, but I'm aware of it.
And we've given you access, I think, to his transcript as well. And just in very brief, he was asked by Mr. Altman about an incident with D865, who tried to hang himself in his room on the 4th of July 2017. And in summary, Mr. Donnelly didn't realise on entering the room that D865, who was unconscious, had a ligature around his neck.
Correct. Yeah.
And it meant that that ligature wasn't removed for about 2 minutes. Mr. Donnelly accepts he should have checked for a ligature immediately. He also accepted that in the forms about the event, he wrongly failed to record that the 2-minute delay had happened. So this is obviously a case of self-harm involving injury. The man was unconscious. Do you know, it's not a test, if you don't know, it's fine. Do you know if this would be classed as a case involving a failure to follow procedures?
Looking at it, it could be. Yeah, it could be, definitely. I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Sure.
But a failure to identify a ligature is, you know, is on our part as a team is, you know, is an error, a massive error.
And you say you didn't know at the time. That's the problem, isn't it? Because unless you know at the time, it can't be reported.
Yeah.
You discuss a general point in your statement at page 21, paragraph 86, some barriers that hindered you from performing your role. And one of them included a lack of a job description, and you say a lack of support from Ben Saunders. Looking back now, did any of these affect your ability to conduct audit and compliancing, in your view? Compliance?
There will have been an impact. I mean, Ben, there was no support and there was no job description. So in terms of what do you turn to decide what you should be doing, it's difficult. I think it had an impact, not necessarily on the compliance, because the compliance was about reporting data.
Yeah.
But in terms of managing action plans and compliance, or compliance as a result of action plans, it was difficult because there was no challenge for inaction.
And had you said there's no job description, had you had any training before you went into the role you're in during the relevant period on auditing of the type that we're looking at in the monthly reports? So we'll be talking then about 2017 and the G4S contract. Obviously now there's a new contract in place, which also contains similarly, I think, KPIs and penalty points. Is it still within your remit to work on compile these reports?
I will compile management data for my function.
Yep. Of the same sort of nature of what we looked at now?
Only relating to mine, yeah.
And do you know, and you might be able to say from your experience within a slightly different part of the jigsaw, are they done on the same basis? So functional heads or individual managers report it to one person and the one person. And do they come back to you to audit and check the quality of your data?
They will ask questions if they feel that it's not correct. They will cross-reference against different sources. And our functions are audited. So contractually they're audited. Every DSO is audited. And every operating standard that falls into our functions audited. So.
And who is it now who creates the sort of reports that we see now for the purposes of applying?
So there's a much larger team.
Yeah.
So back in 2017, when we were doing it, it was myself overseeing Barry. Barry was seconded in to cover a maternity cover. Now there's there's an assistant director of governance that looks after the team. There's a couple of DOMs, I think 2 DOMs, and then probably 3 or 4 officers
Yep. So
in audits and compliance.
Dom is the new title.
Sorry,
of
DOM
DCM.
is the new DCM, yes.
Yep. Fine. Okay. Thank you. The reports that we've just seen, were they discussed at a meeting? The performance points.
The performance points.
During the relevant period.
they all have been part of monthly meetings. Yeah.
Were you at those meetings?
I would have been at SMT meetings. I'd have been at the monthly ops meetings with the Home Office. Yes.
You say at paragraph 88 that you attended weekly meetings to talk about the contract and your compliance
Yeah.
with it. Is that right? Was that meetings with the Home Office or just
Yeah.
G4S meetings?
No, it was Home Office.
And you say that this would have involved, and this is again at paragraph 88, conversations about changes to the contract.
Yes.
Can you recall during the relevant period or thereabouts whether anyone at these meetings suggested that the contract should be changed to increase staffing levels?
I can't recall anyone bringing it up. No. Not as part of a performance issue.
Or at all?
No. I mean, we discussed staffing issues when after Panorama. We increased, so there was a number of meetings about that. There were staffing meetings because we were in a bid process
Yep.
at the time. But in those weekly meetings, I don't recall anyone having discussions about increasing staffing. It was normally myself and Barry and the Home Office. Ultimately, it was Home Office's contract. So if they wanted to increase staffing, they could have changed the contract and changed it.
And equally, if you thought that you as in G4S wanted
Yeah.
to increase staffing,
We could have gone to them and asked to increase, yeah.
you mentioned the staffing around the bid. So you cover this in your statement at 84 to 85. It's page 21 under the heading Management Decisions / the contract. And you say there at 84. Can we show it on screen? Actually, it's SER 000453, and it's page 21. And paragraph 84 on that page. I recall a decision made by Ben Saunders to run staffing levels below the typical headcount. This was prior to an upcoming contract renewal. The upcoming contract had a lower number of staff than levels at the time. Therefore, Ben took the decision not to recruit to our target number of staff, but wanted to keep staffing to contractual requirements, on the basis that if G4S retained the contract, Brook House would not be over headcount. The decision was financially beneficial, as all savings increased the margin. So, can you help me understand this? Do you know when approximately, I know the bid process is quite long.
Yeah.
When was contract renewal coming up?
So I think the renewal was in 2018.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the bid work had been done or was being done. I wasn't massively involved in it. I was made aware that the new bid that we were being asked to, or that we were bidding for and other people were bidding for, was the staffing levels were lower, the level of education and services to residents, such as welfare, was lower. So that's, I think, where a lot of the staffing savings were. So instead of welfare being open 7 days a week, it was only open 5 days a week. That was the spec that was being bid on. So Ben said that he didn't want to. I can't recall what the number was.
Sure.
But he was content to run with vacancies to minimise that transition should we win the contract.
And to show that costs were low at the time that the bid was being
I don't think
reapplied
showing
for?
costs were low would have benefited the bid.
Right. So
Because it was a completely different spec. I think it just meant that we would have transitioned into the new contract with the right number of people as opposed to being
having a
20 or 30 people over.
I see, and then having a kind of steep drop off.
Yeah, and then you would have had to, through sort of people resigning, you would have had to have lowered your numbers.
Can you help me with the difference between the target number of staff and then the contractual requirement number of staff?
Yeah, so the contract was difficult in terms of managing staff in numbers. So there was a target number, as in a target number of full-time equivalent headcount of officers and DCMs, or DOMS. The idea with that is that should have then provided you enough people when you build in your sickness and your leave and your non-effective rate. It should have provided you with enough staff to run the centre.
Yeah.
What we were managed on is a table of contracted hours,
Yeah.
and that fluctuated based on headcount. So if the headcount in the centre was high, the number of hours that needed to be provided over a 24-hour higher,
Yep.
and if it was lower, it was lower. So in effect, you could not have your full headcount, but still provide your contracted hours.
I see. And not reach the point at which you would incur a penalty.
Yes.
This policy of running the staffing numbers lower in the run up to the bid, is that an explicit policy by Ben Saunders, or was it more of an unspoken kind of gradual plan?
It was a discussion he had with me that said he wanted me to maintain the contracted hours, but that he wasn't going to recruit to the full headcount.
And was the Home Office aware of that?
I don't know.
Did you ever have a conversation with him in the presence of anyone from the Home Office about that?
I don't recall him, that happening with the Home Office present.
And you've said at 85 that this added unnecessary pressure to the staff and made the role more difficult.
Yeah, of course it did. It's a minimum for a reason. Obviously, when the contract was written, the minimum is, what you should be able to run the centre safely on. That's what's agreed as the minimum, the MSL, I think it's referred to, minimum staffing level.
Yep.
So that's agreed in the contract. But obviously, if you are continually running at that, there should be days when you haven't got training on and you haven't got leave, and you'll have over your MSL, which makes the place obviously a little bit easier to run and a better place to be in.
Yep. And you said that running on that minimum for the majority of the time, rather than as an exceptional, I suppose, led to the feeling of staffing being tight. And had we recruited more staff, there would have been many more days where we did not feel that we were scraping by.
Yeah, very much my opinion.
Sure.
But yeah.
And it's not solely because it was difficult to recruit people, from what you've told us, but in fact because there was a decision not to recruit people at that time.
Yeah, it was difficult to recruit at the time. But also there was, part of my remit was training, and it was a frustration between Santi and I. I had many difficult conversations with Santi, who's my training officer, about providing initial training plans, initial training courses, ITCs, where we'd be asked to come up with plans to provide a training course for 30, 40, 50 people. We would spend weeks planning that and identifying external venues and lots of other places to make sure resource-wise we could deliver, only to be told that we wouldn't be doing that anymore. Or to be told that actually an ITC where we would guarantee 20 people turned up with 6.
Yeah.
So in terms of resource of running a training plan or a training course for 6 people, it was quite demoralising for Santi sometimes.
Sure.
So yeah, there was a frustration there.
And you'd be told, you say, that you weren't doing it anymore, so that the ITC had been cancelled and there was no one being trained at that period.
No, it would just be that, I would, knowing that we needed to recruit numbers,
Yeah.
I would make the offer to say I can run, we can run you an ITC that's got 40 or 50 people on it.
In anticipation of
In
getting
anticipation,
those people.
looking at the numbers and the plan, you
Yeah.
can see that that's the numbers you need. So we would go out and plan for that, to be, and to be told that we wouldn't be doing that anymore, and we'd get, you'd get 10 or 12 people through the door.
And you understood that, just to make sure I've understood your point, to be a combination of recruitment itself being difficult, but also a decision not to recruit to the normal staffing levels and keep it at the minimum.
That's my understanding of it at the time, yeah.
You cover, thank you, that can come off the screen now. You cover staffing generally from paragraph 123, so this is page 29 of your statement, wherein you say, generally staff were unhappy with staffing levels. You say it was in line with the contract, but you didn't feel that 2 people per wing was adequate. You say it should have been more like 3 DCOs per wing and 1 DCM, and ideally 6 or 7 staff.
It's a really difficult number to formalise in your head. It's so opinionated about what people think is right number and what people think is the wrong number.
Yeah.
Is 2 people enough to look after 120 residents on a wing at Brook House? Not to provide the adequate services that we want to. However, there's times when actually, if all your support services on the outside, welfare, activities, regime, if all of that stuff is very well resourced, then actually it can be, because a lot of residents spend most of their time off of the units. But even if you double that to 4, depending on what the ask is of the officer, is 4 enough people to look after 120 people?
Yeah.
So it's very subjective. So that's why I tried to draw the difference between the two.
And what the meaning of adequacy is, as you set out in your
Absolutely,
statement.
yeah. You've got your contract compliance, which is 1.
Yep.
And the minimum number there was 2 per wing. But is that adequate? And that's a different question.
And you say in your statement, well, more staff can't guarantee safety because
No.
something can happen and it doesn't really matter if you've got 2 or 4 staff. An unsafe event can happen. But of course, more staff can increase the level of safety, can't they?
Absolutely, yes. It will definitely help.
And moving away just from safety, would you agree that more staffing improves the quality of life for detained persons because of stuff like activities being able to be run, people who want someone to talk to, having somebody they can talk to?
It most certainly can do. A lot of frustration for the residents is not getting answers quickly, or not having questions answered. So if there's and I've operated as an officer on a wing with 2, how much time can you afford one person if you're looking after 120 people? So it's difficult.
And at 125, you say that we talked about staffing levels amongst ourselves and the fact that 2 people on a wing made it difficult, but ultimately it was part of the contract. And then you say we could manage with 2 people, but it limited our ability to assist residents. You say you talked about staffing levels amongst yourselves. Do you mean amongst the SMT, amongst you and people on the wings?
I think everyone, staffing levels is quite a hot topic whenever you're discussing it. So I think I was referring to the fact that we probably spoke about it as an SMT. We definitely did. But also would have spoken about it with DOMs and with officers as well.
And with Home Office?
And with the Home Office, yeah.
And did they, in general, share the same sorts of thoughts of you about low staffing and its impact?
Yeah, I think they did share the same views. Yeah.
Turning to page 7 of your statement, paragraph 24, you say, in my opinion, during the relevant period, the SMT were not a united team, and the leadership from the director, Ben Saunders, at the time was not very strong. I raised compliance issues with him on numerous occasions and asked him to arrange a meeting to discuss action plans. When he attended such meetings, he was shouted down by the SMT and little was done.
Yeah.
Do you remember which compliance issues you raised?
So we had a number of action plans at the time, and still do now, referred to as CAPs or consolidated action plans. And we'd have one for internal recommendations from our own auditing and one for external recommendations for HMRP and IMB and Home Office input. So part of my role was to manage those and to manage the progress and to compile evidence in order to look at signing those actions off as compliant. So monthly, Barry would send out an email to functional heads and to other managers to say, can we have an update on your CAP actions? And rarely would he get a response back. So I raised it with Ben and said, look, is there a way that, I'm trying to push this, but obviously I'm a level below, some of these managers. So in terms of having those conversations, it's difficult. Can you raise it? Can me and you have a meeting with each functional head or with the functional heads together? He agreed it would be a good idea. He said to me that he would raise it in the next SMT and that we would, moving forward, have a meeting between myself, Ben, and the functional head, and we would go through the consolidated action plan. I wasn't at the next SMT meeting, but from what was fed back to me, Ben raised it, and the other functional head said that they wouldn't be doing that, as in shouted him down, and that it died. The death there.
Do you understand what the nature of the resistance to following through the action plans was?
I'm not too sure. I don't know, I don't know if it was people protecting their workload. I don't know if it was that people didn't see any benefit in it. I'm not too sure what the resilience was. I think there was a resilience to it accept failure in your own function at times, which is what I sort of alluded to in my statement.
Amongst any particular teams or in general across the board?
I think some functional heads were probably more engaged with it than others. There were specific people that were very defensive, I think, in their stance and their take towards issues being raised.
Who?
So Michelle Brown was particularly defensive. She would quite often, if you raised an issue, and that, you know, you're raising an issue from a good place to say, I've noticed this, just to let you know, it's your function, could you have a look? Quite often that would be turned around and directed back at you, and you know, another failing in your area would be brought up, well, you know, you shouldn't be raising this because you're not doing this in your area. So you had that sort of mentality. Neil Davis did similar things. I think generally most people were defensive, but I got a feeling that some were not being so. People like Stacey Dean was very good and very engaged, but I think she was defensive just because of the atmosphere, as opposed to trying to be difficult.
So you knew then, as a result of the times you raised it, you say numerous times, that the action plans weren't being followed through in the way that, in your view, they should have been. And you didn't get the highest level, I suppose, support from Ben Saunders to ensure that any resistance was overcome. Did you ever consider going above Mr. Saunders to say, look, the HMIP have said we need to do these things and it's just not going to happen?
From what I can recall, action plan progress was reported to the trading review as part of the monthly submission. So it was, you know, it was shared higher within G4S.
So you think that G4S at some level, through the mechanism of the trading review, would have known that these sorts of things weren't being followed up?
Yeah, I believe so. They scrutinised those submissions in great detail. So.
And you didn't otherwise take any steps to tell anyone else, I've been trying to do this and it's not?
No, I didn't raise it above Ben's head, no.
Okay, I want to ask now about a specific incident. So this is an incident on 13th of May 2017 involving D687.
Yep.
We've heard about this both in phase one at the end of last year and during this phase. And we've seen footage as well, and I asked Mr. Farrell about this last week. Mr. Collier, who's also provided an expert report to the inquiry, has commented on it. So D687 had been in immigration detention since March 2015 and had been in Brook House since October that year. He spoke on the footage, as we've seen, and in his statement of having lost his brother and not being allowed to go to the funeral. And he was due on this date, we're going to look at, to be moved to the Verne, which is quite far away from his family. And he went to the toilet and he cut up his T-shirt. Do you recall the incident?
Yeah, I do recall the incident, yeah.
Can we look at the use of force documentation then, please? CJS 005652. So this is the front page, and we can see your name there. So just to clear up any confusion here, the things that are crossed out we should ignore. Is that right? So handcuffs
That is
used,
generally the way they'd be written, yeah.
yes, means handcuffs were used,
Yes.
and camera used, no. Right, fine. And the reason given there, which is at the bottom of the page, a reason for use of force is to facilitate transfer / prevent self-harm. That's what SH means, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's noted there to be unplanned. And he
Yes.
was on an ACDT. Would you have known before the incident that he was on an ACDT?
I don't recall remembering now whether I knew he was on an ACDT or not. I would have, on the day, I should have been aware because it would have been on the sort of daily handover and spec. So if I was DD, which I was on the day, I would have known who was ACDT, who wasn't. So on the day, I would assume I would have known.
Fine. And it says, yes, he was seen by healthcare after the use of force. If we go to page 4, it's confirmed there that it's your name. And the reason again given is preventing self-harm. And to the following page, please. Was the healthcare present throughout the incident? No. And injuries, did the detainees sustain any injuries? Again, no is ticked and didn't require hospitalisation. Next page, please. Was body-worn camera used, yes is ticked. That's the bottom of those 4 options, but
Yeah.
in fact it wasn't used, was it?
No, and I mean, I've said in my statement there's a number of errors I made in completing this report, and I completely hold my hands up to them. I can't comment as to why I made them. You know, they weren't a deliberate error. I think in terms of body-worn camera, I think Chris had one.
Yes.
And
Mr.
I think
Mr.
I made
Farrell.
an assumption without checking with them that they'd turned theirs on and they hadn't, which is why when I was writing that report I ticked yes. So there's a number of errors in there that I made, but they weren't sort of deliberate errors at the time.
Mr. Farrell, I asked, and he looked at the video footage, and he recognises he was wearing one as well, and he thinks
Yeah.
that, or maybe I suggested that when you have it on, there's a red light, and
Generally, yeah,
there
it
was
makes
no
a
light
beep
on.
and there's a light. Yeah.
And there's no light on, and we obviously don't have any footage other than Mr. Tully's undercover
Yeah.
footage. Fine. So page 8, just to set out the background of the event. There is some background by you which says that you were duty director that day.
Yeah.
It was your second duty director day out of 3. You say that a suitable crew had been arranged. Third from the bottom paragraph, there were concerns that he wouldn't comply, but he did compliantly walk to the discharge waiting room.
Yes.
You got a call from Chris Donnelly saying he'd tied something around his neck. And at the bottom of the page there, you went to the area, didn't enter, but you did look into the room, and you saw there D687 with a T-shirt around his neck. Going to page 9, commenting on the ligature, you talk about where it was attached to the kind of
Yeah.
mobility handle, and you say, should D6, this is just by the first redaction there, should D687 have dropped, the knot would have been free to move to the lowest part of the handrail and would not have applied pressure. What's the relevance of that?
So that was, I mean, it was part of my assessment and my decision making at the time. So I know, obviously, later in Collier's report, later in Collier's report, he suggests that, you know, I used a lighter to close the gap to initiate force. Part of my assessment at the time was that ligature and whether it was removable as opposed to initiating force. My intention throughout all of that was to remove that ligature, because by removing the ligature from the rail, it neutralised the incident and the situation. So at the time, I was acting in what I thought was the best interest of everyone involved, to try and bring it to a very quick and swift end. So my intention when I closed the gap was to secure that ligature that was on the rail. The reason I mention it in there is because it's part of my thought process and part of my risk assessment at the time. That's why I've put it in there. I appreciate what Collier says in his report. And yes, I could have dealt with it differently. I could have walked away. I could have planned it. His report suggests that's without risk. And, you know, that has its own risks with it. That would have prolonged the incident by half an hour, 40 minutes for us to get more officers present. It would have, you know, we would have had to have entered that area with a team in PPE, which would have identified what was going to happen. So there was a number of different things going on in my mind when I was making that decision. I know it says that my intent was to initiate force. I didn't act, you know, the footage shows that I made, you know, my direction was towards the ligature. I didn't make initial contact with the resident. I secured the ligature. That was always my intention. Had I intended to use force, as per the manual, I would have secured his head. That would have been the first thing that I would have looked to secure. It wasn't. I looked to remove the ligature, which I did so quite quickly, and then the restraint took place.
But the restraint took place moments after you took contact with the ligature,
Yeah.
and that's because the rest of the team didn't know what was going to happen, did they?
And that's, you know, and that's part of my fault, and that's part of my reflection, and that's part of what I've sort of said in my statement. I could have dealt with it differently. I appreciate that my actions put the other guys there in a situation where they had to react to what I was doing, and they were unaware of that. So I take that on board, definitely. Would I do things differently now? Quite possibly, yes, I would. At the time, I thought I was acting in the best interest of everyone there to sort of bring that to a quick and safe resolution by securing that ligature.
So the other officers had to act to a certain extent on instinct, didn't
Yeah,
they?
yeah, they did.
And they thought, we need to restrain this person.
Yeah.
But your intention hadn't been to restrain him, it had just been to remove the ligature.
Yes.
And you say that waiting longer, so, you accept that Mr. Collier says that escalation hadn't reached its kind of ultimate point of it's not going to get any better. You waiting longer could have prolonged the risk, and it comes with risks, you say.
Yeah.
Would you accept that, given that you say that if he'd have dropped from the toilet, the knot would not have strangulated him effectively, that actually the risk level was relatively low at the time?
The risk was still relatively low. It might not have strangled him. I couldn't be 100% sure. Hence why, when I had the opportunity to secure it and remove that risk, I did. Who's to know what would have happened if he dropped? He could have banged his head on the toilet bowl and suffered a severe head injury. I don't know. So
You'd also accept that there's risks of instigating an act which you say you didn't intend to turn into a restraint, but there was some possibility that it could have done because no one knew.
Yeah.
That holds its own risks, doesn't it?
yeah, of course it does. Yeah.
He could bang his head in the course of the
Yeah.
restraint.
Yeah, it does.
And having the ligature around his neck, removed, as you say, from the kind of handrail, but still one part of it around his neck, while being restrained, that holds a risk, doesn't it?
Yeah. Everything we do holds a risk.
And the risk of taking that action is maybe in hindsight greater than the risk of waiting.
Yeah, and that's, you can do that with reflection. I was in a situation, I arrived, I made an assessment. Like I said, I thought I was acting in best interests at the time. It wasn't my intent, to heighten risk. I was aware that they'd been engaging with him for quite a period of time. The assessment was that continued engagement was unlikely to de-escalate that incident, because the trigger for that incident was the removal, was the transfer to another centre. So all the time that was still a possibility, it was very unlikely that situation was going to de-escalate.
And if you had waited, it would have been possible to get healthcare to attend, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and and that's part of the things I accept. If I had waited and we had planned it, it would have been, there would have been someone recording it, and healthcare would have been present. Yeah.
Is it so? I appreciate you did draw the distinction between planning it. You have to go away. You have to do a brief. You have to wear PPE, and you said why that might not have been appropriate. But is it possible that you could have just called healthcare anyway?
Yeah, it is. It is, and again, that's part of my reflection. It's healthcare probably should have been there before I got there. I should have taken a more strategic view. I didn't at the time. I got involved in the situation, which obviously Collier suggests, and that's that's the learning that I've taken away. Definitely is that I'd step back and assess that situation slightly differently this time around.
And would you accept that the relevance of healthcare being there is not just because he's potentially going to be physically harmed, but also because he's potentially mentally unwell?
Absolutely.
So you heard him say things like, "I want to die. I want to go away in a body bag."
I can't remember whether I was there or not when he was some of the things he was saying when I was there. He made it very clear he didn't want to leave, and I could see he was upset.
Distressed.
Yeah.
And you say you would have known, although obviously you can't remember now, that he was on an ACDT because it would have been in a handover. Okay. So you've commented on the inquiry's experts' findings there. When you filled in your use of force form, which we just looked at, which has just disappeared from the screen, you didn't say in that use of force form that it was never your intention to use force, did you?
Well, I also don't say that I did use force.
Well, force was used.
Force was used, but in that report, I don't say that I did use force.
But your team used force.
The team used force, yeah.
And they didn't know what your intention
No.
was. Do you think it would have been more accurate to say in this form, I was planning to remove the
Yeah.
ligature, my team saw this as the instigation of use of force. And to say within this form, which is meant to include in it the rationale for using force. In fact, there was no rationale for using force because that was never my intention.
Yeah, and looking back, you're right. Yeah, I could have put that in there, and that would have given a a better overview of the report.
It would have been an accurate interpretation of what happened, wouldn't it?
It would have been more accurate. Yeah, I didn't put in there my thought process at the time,
And so
or all of it.
your team, who we've heard from some of, their view was that the rationale for use of force was to prevent injury and then later to remove him. And in fact, what we're hearing is there was no intention at all to use force.
It wasn't my intention to use force, no.
Should this have been recorded as an event of use of force out with the use of force requirements? So not as a last resort, because force is used without any rationale.
Well, there's still a rationale there to use force, because
What's the rationale to use force?
one, there's a ligature present that poses a risk, and I had an opportunity to sterilise that. Two, there was still an enforced transfer to take place. I'm not sure why the transfer was taking place at the time. A suitable crew transfer suggests that, well, it is the fact that the Home Office have decided that that person needs to transfer, and if they refuse, then we are to use force to remove them and hand them over to that escort team. So there was still a valid reason to move him from that room and hand him over to the escort team.
That's a retrospective justification, though, isn't it? That's not the reason that force was used on him at the time that force was used on him.
I don't know overly what you want me to say in that. You know, I've set out what it was that, you know, my thought process at the time and my thinking at the time. Yeah, there was a number of, like I said, there was a number of different considerations to make. We had to deliver him to the escorting team for him to transfer. That was an instruction from the Home Office. So if I'd gone away and planned that use of force and come back, the use of force would still have taken place to have handed him over to that escort team, potentially, if he was still refusing to come out of the room.
Potentially, yes.
So, yeah, that was the...
But the actual use of force happened because there was confusion among the team of what your movement towards him meant.
Yeah.
Chair, I just realised it's 1 minute past one. It might be now a good time for a break. If we come back at 2 o'clock and continue with the evidence of Mr. Horton.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Horton. Thank you.
Oh, hi.